Chicago tonight on this Monday, August 27th.
So this is very shocking to me that he would use this kind of language.
Cardinal Blaise Cupich speaks out after landing in the middle of a firestorm involving Pope Francis and allegations of sexual abuse cover-up.
I'm very happy with my life. I'm very happy with what I've been able to do.
Reflections on the life of the late Arizona Senator John McCain, who died Saturday from brain cancer.
What we want to do is be a resource for the almost 400,000 state and local government employees.
The post-Janus battle for union members is on.
She's very gentle. She's very sweet.
And if a Chicago City Council proposal is approved, horse-drawn carriages in the city could soon be a thing of the past. All that and more next on Chicago Tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Eddie Aruza. We begin with some of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Well, it's D-Day on Lakeshore Drive. A major resurfacing and construction project is now underway from Monroe Street to Grand Avenue, and it includes repairs to the bridge over LaSalle Street. Motorists began feeling the pain of the project in earnest today, with lane and ramp closures ballooning travel times and leaving some drivers scrambling to find alternate routes. 2 lanes will be closed in each direction to accommodate an accelerated construction schedule, which officials say should be finished by the October 7th Chicago Marathon. Some big news for students who would like to attend the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. For those who qualify, tuition will be free beginning the fall of 2019. The program is called Illinois Commitment, and the hope is to draw talented students who cannot afford to go to the U of I, even with financial aid. Illinois students whose family's total household income is below $61,000 per year, currently the median income in the state, will get 8 semesters of free tuition and fees. Transfer students will be covered for up to 6 semesters. The offer is worth around $15,000 a year or more, depending on what the student majors in. Officials with the school say the program will cost the university about $4 million per year. As for the weather, a day-long heat advisory has just expired. Tonight should be partly cloudy and breezy with a low around 77. Then tomorrow, partly sunny with a slight chance of thunderstorms and a high around 92. And don't forget, you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook via podcast and the PBS video app, as well as online at WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight. Well, Chicago's Catholic Archbishop Cardinal Blaise Cupich is speaking out today after finding himself in the middle of a firestorm between former Vatican official and Pope Francis. That former official claims the Pope covered up sexual abuse allegations against Washington's former Archbishop, Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. And the official also alleges McCarrick orchestrated the appointment of Cupich to lead Chicago's Archdiocese. Paris Schutz has the latest in Paris. This bombshell came as the Pope was in Ireland. What have been the repercussions so far?
And Cupich just came back from Ireland as well, also on that trip. And Cupich says he's astonished at these accusations. This was a letter that came out Saturday evening. They are leveled by the Vatican's former ambassador to the U.S., the papal nuncio, Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano. He's the one that initially informed Cupich that he was selected to lead Chicago's church by Pope Francis. But in this explosive letter, Vigano accuses Pope Francis of covering for former Washington Archbishop Theodore McCarrick, despite knowing about years of sexual abuse allegations of adult males and minors. And Vigano says it is McCarrick, who is seen here, who had the Pope's ear and went to bat for Cupich to get the job in Chicago, because Vigano says Cupich wasn't on anybody's finalist list. But Cupich today denies that any of that's true and says that he believes Vigano has some sort of vendetta.
That statement seems to imply that all of a sudden I fell out of the sky. I have been appointed by 3 popes as bishop. I don't think that anybody walks into the Pope's office and says, oh, by the way, here's a guy I'm pulling out of the hat, and you should appoint him. That's absurd. There's some payback going on here of relationships that soured between him and other people in Rome over the years. And I think there's a real bitterness there.
Paris, for a while now, there has been talk of a civil war within the Catholic Church of conservatives and traditionalists and the more progressive factions, which include the Pope and Archbishop Cupich. Did he address that today?
Yeah, Eddie, and Cardinal Cupich said he hoped that this wasn't part of that, but certainly this has to be looked at in the broader context of that quote-unquote civil war. And Vigano reserved his harshest words for Cupich on Cupich's views of homosexuality. Well, first of all, Vigano believes that a lot of the priest-sex abuse crisis is driven by tolerance of homosexual behavior in some pockets of the church. And in his letter, Vigano says, quote, regarding Cupich, one cannot fail to note his ostentatious arrogance and the insolence with which he denies the evidence that is now obvious to all, that 80% of the abuses found were committed against young adults by homosexuals who are in a relationship of authority over their victims. But Cupich today says that his point is to look at the studies that say that's inaccurate, and it's important not to conflate homosexuality with pedophilia.
The point that they're trying to make is that the child abuse problem we have is due to homosexuality. And my point was, whenever we talk about that, be careful, because the John Jay study said you cannot reduce this to one factor, even if there is male-on-male abuse that's happening, to a matter that it's caused by homosexuality. Because if you do that, what you're really saying is that homosexuals are more prone to abuse children than straight people. That's unjust. It's wrong.
As for Pope Francis's response to the allegations leveled by the former papal nuncio, he says, quote, read the statement carefully and make your own judgment. I will not say a single word on this. I believe the statement speaks for itself. When some time passes and you have drawn your own conclusions, I may speak. Again, Vigano accusing Pope Francis of knowing about Theodore McCarrick, the former Archbishop of Washington, D.C., and his history of allegations of sexual abuse.
And today, Illinois Attorney General Lisa Madigan announced a hotline for victims of priest sex abuse to come forward. What is the latest on her inquiry into the Catholic Church?
Well, Madigan has requested the records of 7 clergy members that were involved in this grand jury investigation in Pennsylvania. These are clergy members that had at one point were in Chicago. Some of them are dead at this point, but she wants the records of all of their time here in Chicago. Cupich says he is complying with those requests for the records on those people.
We're going to cooperate fully, but they have all of our records already. We turned them over in 14 and 15, and all of the names have been already reported to the police. So we're happy to cooperate. We think it should be done across the board. But I also think that child abuse isn't just in the Catholic Church. We read on the pages of the papers every day what's happening in school systems, in different organizations. So let's be even-handed. Let's make sure that the records and the files of all those institutions are opened up so that the state can come and take a look at it.
And for our full interview with Cardinal Blaise Cupich, you can go to our website, WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight. We get into these topics and more. Very revealing.
Paris, thank you. Up next, remembering the life of Senator John McCain.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the City Club of Chicago.
Smart people may disagree about what makes a great city, but part of what makes Chicago great is that we don't have to agree. To run a city like ours, a lot of issues come up. The City Club of Chicago is a place to debate those issues and hear from the men and women who shape the policies, lead the industries, and tell the stories that define our city. For the free and open exchange of ideas, the City Club of Chicago.
Senator John McCain is being widely honored today, not only for his dignity and service during 36 years in Congress, but also as a Purple Heart war hero, having served in Vietnam and being taken prisoner of war for 5 years. McCain died Saturday from brain cancer, but he wrote a final letter to the American people, and this afternoon, one of his former campaign managers read it to reporters. Here's a bit of it.
I've tried to serve our country honorably. I've made mistakes, but I hope my love for America will be weighed favorably against them. We weaken our greatness when we confuse our patriotism with tribal rivalries that have sown resentment and hatred and violence in all the corners of the globe. We weaken it when we hide behind walls rather than tear them down. Do not despair of our present difficulties. We believe always in the promise and greatness of America.
And with us tonight are two guests who knew Senator McCain, either from reporting on him or as a friend. And they are Jim Warren, executive editor of NewsGuard and a contributing editor at U.S. News and World Report. Jim covered McCain's 2000 presidential campaign. And Illinois House Republican leader Jim Durkin, who served as Senator McCain's Illinois campaign chairman in the senator's 2000 and 2008 presidential bids. Welcome, gentlemen, to this remembrance of the life of Senator McCain. And Jim Durkin, tell us a little bit about that time when you first met Senator McCain at the Hyatt Regency right here in Chicago.
Well, it was an interesting time. It was 1999, and then a friend of my brother's was involved with was involved with the campaign, and he said he's coming into town. I really think that there's something about him, and I knew about his history. And he says, just meet him and talk to him. So I met him, we had a brief conversation, and I went to this private dinner with the elite of Chicago. I mean, really heavy hitters. Wonderful dinner, but I can tell right off the bat that two people didn't belong there. It was myself and Senator McCain. We sat next to each other, and he was telling me jokes the whole night. So at the end of the evening, the patriarch, this elderly woman who was worth a lot of money, she went around and said, could all of you tell us a story or give us an idea of a movie that has given you meaning in life and guidance? So we went around the table, and people were talking about all these movies that were so deep, whether it's Dr. Zhivago, you just go down the line of these Citizen Kane. It came to Senator McCain, Citizen Kane. We came to Senator McCain, and they asked him that same question. He just sat back and he, crossed his arms. In his typical way, he goes, the movie that's given me inspiration and guidance is a movie called It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, and Spencer Tracy was in it. Place went silent. People didn't know what to do. He just burst out laughing after that. And from that moment on, I realized this is my guy. This is an incredible hero. He was a chairman of the Commerce Committee, but he has a way of diffusing every situation with some levity, making people feel at ease. He made me feel at ease.
And he showed the real sense of humor that he had, despite everything that he had happened to him in his life.
Wicked sense of humor, and I witnessed it from the front row for so many years.
Jim Warren, when did you first encounter Senator McCain?
1993. I was Chicago Tribune bureau chief in Washington, back when the Tribune had a real presence and influence in Washington, and they were conscious very much of the media. McCain knew that we were perhaps potentially his key constituency. So there were dinners I was invited to, very small ones, where his clear, obvious, alluring traits, were evident. His accessibility, his candor, his at times total lack of discretion. So as you hear all these wonderful words from colleagues.
Okay, wait, don't go beyond that.
Yeah.
Give us an insight into that lack of discretion.
Well, you'd ask him what he thought of Senator so-and-so, and he would tell you, and that would get back to those folks, and it's why he was admired on some levels by his colleagues, but he was not well liked by most of them. There are people you've had, here on your air who will tell you different stories about the tough, at times nasty John McCain, who had a volcanic temper. But again, if you're in the media, that was absolutely fine. There was, again, an honesty which was totally refreshing. In late 90s, I was up on the Hill one day, press conference, one of many social conservatives, once again, railing about smut in Hollywood and on the broadcast airwaves, and it was all the usual suspects. It was McCain, Joseph Lieberman, William Bennett, the same man who was education secretary, remember in '87, called Chicago public schools the worst in the nation. And so I'm watching this press conference, and I'm saying, wait a second, Lieberman and McCain were both regular guests on the risque syndicated radio show of the time with Don Imus. And Imus, who occasionally was a bit misogynist, it was a bit racist, and these guys were on that show all the time. I went up to him individually afterwards, and here's the difference between Lieberman and McCain. Lieberman says, well, I don't know, he never does any of that when I'm on the air. I went up to McCain and said, well, what about your being on Imus? He says, I stand accused rightfully of hypocrisy.
And he admitted it. Jim Warren, what was it about him besides his sense of humor and that you felt some simpatico feelings about being among elites that you decided to join his 2000 campaign and become the chairman here in Illinois?
Was his independence, and I think it's extremely important. It was important back in 2000 for me, and it's even more important right now, his independence and his love for country before party. And that's what I've always admired about him. This is a man, we can talk about patriotism, but I also like to use the expression true grit because of what he's done in his life. He was not afraid of anything, and he was not afraid to speak his mind. And we need more John McCains in government, people who are prepared to put the better good for society ahead of the party. And that's what I've always admired of him, and I've tried to take after how he has positioned himself in the United States Senate.
And in fact, he said that you were the only crazy person in Illinois that would support him at the time.
That's correct. In 2000, the whole political operation for the Republicans were with Governor Bush. And I made a commitment to get him on the ballot, which was no easy task. I did it. I got delegates, and we got all his petitions to get on the ballot, and I filed on the last day, the last minute. And he was eternally grateful after that. He was extremely loyal to me, but he referred to me as that crazy guy who went with me instead of the Republican, establishment with Bush.
And 2000 was a fascinating campaign. I mean, he would later be the nominee and up against Barack Obama years later. But in 2000, lone wolf fashion, he decided in the summer of 2000 he was not going to spend time, as everybody else, including Bush, did in Iowa. Instead, he was going to be in South Carolina. His whole strategy was pull off a big upset in New Hampshire and then be in South Carolina, which meant I got to spend days and days basically alone with him going through South Carolina.
And let me ask you, at a time when the press and the media in this country is under something of an assault, especially from the White House, he had something of a love-hate relationship with reporters, but he was always accessible and respectful. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, there was part of him which, if he felt that you had done him wrong, he would tell you that. Everybody remembers that dramatic Senate return last July, and it was ostensibly about Obamacare, it was ostensibly about lack of collegiality, but there were a couple of lines in that speech. One was about the bombastic loudmouths in the press, quote, to hell with them, and he said, I think he said our lack of civility, our inabilities to succeed is their livelihood. And there are not many guys, even though he didn't write those words, as I was watching in Chicago, I immediately emailed the guy. I said, did you write these words? To a guy named Mark Salter, and he said, yeah. But he had the nerve to put it on the table.
To actually say that. Jim Durkin, I'm going to have you give the last word here because we wish we could give a lot more time, but we're almost out of time. In terms of a lot of folks bemoaning that the Republican Party in the mold of Senator McCain is dissipating. What do you say to that?
I say that the legacy of John McCain will carry on for decades and for generations to come. He is a man who will be
what
in
is
our
that
history.
legacy?
The legacy is about independence and putting your country before your party. And he is a man that disavowed the politics of division. At the end of the day, despite, he can be a bit salty and a little bit cranky, but the fact is, it was about country first and, the politics of the party next. And it's something that I had talked to him about and clearly disavowed it, and it was not what he was about.
Jim Durkin and Jim Warren, thank you very much for your memories.
Thank you.
And a programming note, tonight at 10 o'clock, WTTW will air Frontline's biography of Senator John McCain. It will be rebroadcast tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Up next, how the U.S. Supreme Court decision striking down some union dues is already impacting Illinois. It's been 2 months since the U.S. Supreme Court issued its landmark Janus decision, which ended compelled union dues from public service employees, and public employee unions in Illinois are beginning to feel the effects of that decision, with even more battle lines now being drawn. Chicago Tonight's Amanda Vinicky is here with some of the latest. And Amanda, some union members have already been receiving mailings about this, haven't they?
Yeah, if it hasn't hit their mailboxes yet, it soon will. And we're talking about public school teachers, state employees, also perhaps some municipal employees that could be police, firefighters. And that mail looks something along the lines of this. It's from the Illinois Policy Institute, which describes itself as a free market think tank. It's linked to high-powered conservatives. And the Liberty Justice Center, which represented plaintiff Mark Janus in that landmark Supreme Court decision. Now, that's the legal arm of the IPI. The Janus decision's complicated. Public employees never had to join a union, but they were required in Illinois to pay these so-called fair share fees to cover collective bargaining, grievance protections that unions are required to provide to all workers. The mailer tells workers that because of Janice, it's a new era of choice, that their rights have changed. They can opt out, and it goes on to explain how. I asked the IPI spokesman why it took this proactive step.
This is an individual's choice. We want to be the source for the truth about what the case means and what their rights are.
It's already hit some teachers' mailboxes where the Illinois Education Association union says members aren't happy about it.
This is basically a misinformation campaign, and I can tell you the sentiment from our members who've received these is they are upset, they're angry, they're wondering how IPI got their personal information and why they would be sending them misinformation about their union in the mail.
So, Amanda, where did the IPI get that personal information?
It says that it just used state freedom of information laws and then, cross-matched that with publicly available data of folks' addresses.
So with an election coming up, folks' mailboxes are going to be full of pamphlets. Why is this significant?
Well, this one is because the Janice decision could really have some big implications down the road. If union membership drops, they'll have less power to negotiate, and that would likely lead to lower wages and benefits. But also politically, if unions' power is diminished, that could give a big boost to conservatives. The IPI spokesman, though, says this is not about politics.
It's just to convey the simple reality of what the choice is. Again, it's ultimately up to each individual to decide what's best for them, what is in their interest.
But union leaders scoff at that notion.
I think when you look at who funds IPI, you can see that it's definitely about politics. Governor Bruce Rauner gives them money. You can see that Dick Uihlein, who's a big conservative billionaire investor, gives them money as well. This is about privatizing public education, and our members know that. If they can take away our members' voices, our teachers, our education support staff, if they can silence them and the voice they use to advocate for their students, then they are one step closer to privatizing public education, which is just the last great frontier.
She says that misinformation is that the flyer says that member money is spent on politics, when in fact legally union member dues cannot be spent on any political campaigning.
Amanda, thank you. Horse-drawn carriages have been operating in Chicago for decades, but a measure now making its way through the Chicago City Council would put an end to the industry. Chicago Tonight's Evan Garcia has the story.
She's very gentle. She's very sweet. I worked with her about 11 years, and she's like my child. I don't have any kids. This is my daughter.
Kathy McFadden has been a carriage operator in Chicago for 35 years. The company she works for, Antique Coach and Carriage, is one of only 3 horse-drawn carriage companies in the city. Soon, there may be none. 42nd Ward Alderman Brendan Riley has proposed an ordinance banning all horse-drawn carriages in Chicago. Riley says the roads have changed.
I don't think many people contemplated horse-drawn carriages to be commingled with semi-trailers and CTA buses and tour buses and Uber and Lyft and taxi cabs and everything else we've got out there on the right-of-way.
Horse-drawn carriages usually set off from the water tower, here at the heart of the Magnificent Mile. But when temperatures exceed 90 degrees, like today, city law forbids carriage companies from operating. Animal rights activist Jody Whitaker says the urban environment is inhumane for horses.
The horses have no life. They have no grass under their feet. They have no pasture.
Whitaker says she and others monitor carriage companies and document violations of city law, like working horses beyond the daily limit of 6 hours.
These are all violations. A lot of overworking the horses, not providing water, working them when it's too hot, and so forth.
The industry is popular with tourists. John Radke is visiting from Minnesota and says the animals are simply following tradition.
I think that horses have been around for many years and we've used them for that purpose, and it's not like they're abusing the animals. It's a culture thing, and that's what horses were bred for.
Back at the Antique Coach and Carriages stable in Lincoln Park, Kathy takes us for a little ride.
I had somebody get engaged in my carriage last week. Horses are smart. She knows that dog is not big enough to do anything to her, so she's like, okay, you just go ahead and bark.
One compromise discussed over the years was permitting horse-drawn carriages in Chicago parks only. But McFadden says that wouldn't be enough.
I'd love to go in the park and do a ride that's part city and part park. But I think if we only operated in the parks, it might be the demise of our business.
Larry Ortega owns another company, Chicago Horse and Carriage, and says if the ban passes, Chicago will lose a part of its history.
It's a part of Chicago now for 38, going on 39 years. And families come downtown looking for us. And I think it's going to take a lot of character out of this city and a tie to its past.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Evan Garcia.
The proposed horse-drawn carriage ban is currently in the City Council Committee on License and Consumer Protection. Alderman Riley and co-sponsor Alderman Brian Hopkins say they hope the measure is taken up at the City Council's September meeting. And that is our show for this Monday night, abbreviated to bring you special pledge programming. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily e-alert, and join us tomorrow night live at 7. A local pastor goes on a listening tour asking for community input on how to address Chicago's epidemic of violence. And as the Chicago Jazz Fest celebrates 40 years, pianist Ramsey Lewis says he just might be calling it quits soon. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Eddie Aruza. Thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices. Bob Clifford is on the board of overseers of the Rand Institute for Civil Justice, a think tank in California.